Hello everyone. This video is probably gonna be one of the longest videos I have recorded in a while. On this video, I'm gonna be talking about Deckman versus E.Tevent versus Awakened E.Tevent. We're gonna be going depth into calculation of like the damage of every single one, the combination of like your whole combo and like the advantage and disadvantage of each of them. Uh, the first thing I want to compare is the raw status base from Deckman, E.Tevent, and Awakened E.Tevent. That's just in case you don't have the legendary one. It's a thing that it's not that relevant anymore, but I think it's important to gloss over. This is a status table for all of them. From this table, what you can take is the normal and E.Tevent, Awakened E.Tevent have both more base damage than Deckman, meaning it's gonna do way more damage in all the skills. They also have more range. The benefit of the Deckman is having overall better status for the class, usually, as well as having weaken chance rate, which is huge, was huge for tier 2. Deckman also has faster attack speed, which leads to more attacks and faster animations. And the other extra benefit is the Awakened E.Tevent has decent attack base and like range, so you can try to work with other alternatives using it. For example, you can use Awakened E.Tevent with legendary either dagger or SNS or staff, depending on what you want to do. But overall, none of this matters, as the legendary, the one is just better than all of them together. And in the end, you're gonna always be wanting to transfer your passive from the E.Tevent, Awakened E.Tevent, or Deckman to the legendary one. Alright, let's go to the next part. Price and upgrade. It's important to note that Deckman is much cheaper, so that's a thing to take into consideration. And the E.Tevent has the benefit and the problem of needing an upgrade. So there's the benefit that you can actually improve the weapon and make it better, but there's also the bad part that you do have to upgrade the weapon to make it better. So you need to either save Lucent, buy Lucent to buy the shards to upgrade the E.Tevent, or just grind it over time. So it's important thing to take into consideration. Sorry. Now let's go to the application. The application of the E.Tevent dot is over other curses. So every time you cast a curse, there's 15% chance it's gonna cast the E.Tevent curse on top of it. You usually get 2 or 3 chances depending on on the combo that you do, using 1, 2 touches and decaying. It's important that you notice as well that the E.Tevent can reproc the E.Tevent on the Karmic. With that I mean, when you put a E.Tevent curse and you Karmic spread that E.Tevent curse, there's a chance that the E.Tevent will reproc the E.Tevent to restart the curse timer. That's relevant because it can increase a little bit of the curse timer or decrease depending on the enemy debuff duration. And another thing that is really important to notice here is that the E.Tevent chance is 15%, and that can increase or decrease based on the enemy weaken resistance. So it's really important that you have 100 to 200 more weaken chance than their weaken resistance. So the E.Tevent chance to be applied can increase to around 33 to 50%. Otherwise, if you have even lower weaken chance than their weaken resist, your E.Tevent chance can drop upwards to 10 to 5%. That means you're rarely gonna proc the E.Tevent, which is a big deal versus healers and tanks, of course, and even DPSs, because E.Tevent is a big part of your burst. Now let's talk about the Deckman application. The Deckman application is over the Ray of Disaster, and it applies Corrupt Magic Circle. It's 100% chance to apply compared to the 15% chance from the E.Tevent, but it can also be resisted with the weaken chance and weaken resist. The difference is that you don't need to have more weaken chance than the weaken resistance of the enemy. You can have a little bit less and you should get a consistent application of the Corrupt Magic Circle from the Ray. The other benefits is even if you're missing or / getting resisted The ray is gonna keep ticking, and every time it ticks, it keeps trying to apply the curse. So as long as you hit the ray of disaster on the enemy, it's gonna keep the ray doing damage, and it's gonna keep trying to reapply CMC, the corrupt magic circle. So it means it's gonna consistently apply the pressure of putting the dot on the enemy. And there's other things that comes from that, which is if the enemy cleanses the corrupt magic circle or you curse explode the corrupt magic circle, the ray of disaster is gonna keep trying to reproc the corrupt magic circle even after the cleanse or after the curse explosion removing your dot. So it's really nice that you can, keep the pressure of the curse reapplying. The other benefit is Ray of Disaster once hit will latch into enemies around if you have the specialization, and the same thing will apply even for evasion users. Once you hit the first target, the Ray is gonna keep putting pressure on those evasion users, so even if you miss one tick, it's gonna keep trying to hit the enemy, and eventually when it hits, it's gonna proc the corrupt magic circle. And anyone that crosses around the beam, the tethering of the Ray of Disaster, is also gonna be applied the corrupt magic circle. That means the application of the Deckman is much more consistent and much more effective as an AoE compared to Tevent. Now let's talk a little bit about extra benefits of each of them before talking about damage and going to more in-depth formulas. The extra benefits from the Tevent comes in fast combos, as you have to cast one less skill compared to the Ray of Deckman. You have an extra skill slot since you don't use Ray of Disaster, and you have way more skill spec points for your masteries or specialization, sorry, because you don't need to spec your Ray. Tevent is a lot more discreet compared to Ray, because Ray just make a bunch of lines coming directly from you that shows where you are. uh, so Tevent is a lot more discreet to fast combo and catch enemies off guard. Tevent lasts for a long time, which forces the enemy to stay in combat for a longer time. It's really hard to get rid of it if you don't have a cleanse. But that is also the same for you, so be aware of that. Since the dots last for a long time, it's very easy to leave a bunch of Tevent dots in a bunch of different people, and when they die to something random in a GVG or ZVZ, it's gonna give you a stack of full of corruption if you're using the mastery, or like the mastery that makes you run, or the passive that makes you run faster, either of those. So that's a really useful thing. If you have the Awakened Tevent, there's also the benefit that you're going to be decreasing 10% of the enemy defense. And as far as I'm aware, this works for everyone. So you're going to be increasing everyone damage on the target by around 5%. Now let's talk a little bit about Deckmans. The Deckman's main benefit over the Tevents is, like I said, it spreads in a bigger AoE area compared to other things. But there's also two things that comes to it that are relevant, which is the stacking. Since Deckman procs a lot of ticks with Ray, you can stack poison very quickly on the enemy. Or, for example, you can start Birken Daggers passive mega quickly compared to using Tevents. Another important thing is since you spread so many curses compared to Tevent, because you are just walking around and anyone that touches the ray gets the curse, it gets really easy to stack it fully full of corruption, because basically you leave a lot of targets with dots and they die very often in the middle of a GVG or ZVZ, so you end up full stacked without needing to kill the enemy by yourself. Like I already said, Deckman can reproc very easily on cleanses or after a curse explosion, so that's a benefit. And the other thing is the dot from the Deckman curse is much more aggressive than the Tevents. While the Tevents lasts longer and does overall more damage, the Deckman's is shorter but does faster damage, more imminent damage, which means Deckman curse actually apply way more pressure on the 10 seconds that it lasts compared to the 10 seconds of Tevent. Meaning Deckman can be way more significant on like finishing targets or putting pressure on the healing of targets, or even like on applying damage overall. That's why if you go to war games, you're gonna notice that if you play with E.Tevent and if you play with Deckman, a lot of times Deckman is gonna give you better results on the damage dealt because it does put way more pressure damage on the field and does spread way more damage like curses around. Alright, now that we spoke about the benefits, the applications, and like the price and the status, let's go for the thing that everyone wants to know, the damage. So I made a few tables here. This Excel is gonna be on the description in case you want to check by yourself and see. I probably don't have everything perfectly. I tried my best to check to make sure everything makes sense. I'm gonna be explaining how it works here, but if you can wanna double check by yourself or use it as a base for any other thing that you wanna do, go ahead. So this first tab is just showing, like I said, the base for the Deckman versus E.Tevent in pre-legendary on status. This other tab is from the other video of weaken resistance versus weaken chance. This should show you how much weaken chance and weaken resist affect each other, and the rate that you can get resisted will change based on the amount of gap that you have between those two status. That's why I say it's very important for E.Tevent specifically to have higher weaken chance versus tanks and healers. Now, if we go for the AoE tab here, we can see that I'm going to be taking the calculations of the base E.Tevent, which is going to be 35% base damage, without any base flat damage because it doesn't have any, and the duration from start, which is 30, which leads to a total dot of 1050 percent damage, basically. And if we include buffs, it adds around 4 seconds from masteries and passives on the curse, which would lead to 1190% total dot. This is good to use in calculations for PvE, so you can have like an idea of your PvE damage. But versus PvP players, I like to use the calculation of the E.Tevent buffs and debuffs around 30%, because most of the users, the players in the game, gonna have around 30% debuffs, either a little bit more or little bit less, depending on their gear pieces or like their runes and other things. But 30% I found to be the average, the consistent average of like most players. So you can see when you apply that 30% over the 34 seconds, it goes to 24 seconds, which reduces the total dot to 840%. If you want to calculate with the Awakened E.Tevent, I recommend adding around 5% more over the final result here, because that's the average you're going to be getting of damage. From the Deckman, which is a corrupt magic circle, you can see the base is 65% with 73 flat damage in a duration now of 9 seconds. It goes to a total dot of 585 to plus 657 flat damage. Then if you apply buffs, it goes to 13 seconds and the total dodge you can see here. And then if you apply the debuffs, which is the PvP, is gonna go back to 9 seconds and go back to this comparison. So this is how I used to calculate my things. And you can see down here I did a comparison of the E.Tevent versus Deckman. It's gonna be taking into consideration all 3 types of calculations that I did, and it's gonna be showing the difference here. You can see the difference on the base is around 465% and 657 base flat damage. That means if I divide the base flat damage over the percentage, which is the difference from the E.Tevent has this much more percent calculated. To reach the base flat damage to make E.Tevent worth doing more damage than the Deckman, I would need to have an average of 141 base damage. This damage is calculated by taking your minimum base damage and your maximum base damage, adding them together and dividing by 2. That's how damage on curses work. So for example, you can see in all 3 different scenarios, if I want to use, for example, on the PvE, which is just the buffs, I'm gonna need to have at least 275 average base damage to make E.Tevent do more damage than the Deckman. And if I want to do that on PvP, I would need to have 257 average base damage to do more damage with the E.Tevent. In case you are confused by that, the best thing that I can show you right now is my status. I have 244 minimum base damage and 516 maximum base damage. So if you add those two and divide by 2, you're gonna get 380. That's my average base damage. Spray above, spray anything, that's just my base damage with Stellarite. And if I apply this into calculation here, as you can see up here, on the situation of a debuff of around 30%, right, the pause buffs, you're gonna see that with the Deckman, I'm gonna be doing roughly 2,880 damage, and with the E.Tevent, I'm gonna be doing 3,192 damage, and with the Awakened E.Tevent, I'm gonna be doing 3,351 damage. That means the calculations work correctly. If I'm above the average from 257 damage, because I'm 380, so I'm way above that, that means E.Tevent should be doing way more damage than Deckman, and that's the truth here, as you can see. I decided to do the calculations again using this time Witching Hour, which is the karmic alteration for single target. That's gonna add 5 seconds on every curse that you have from the one. It's very important to note that. And it's interesting to put that into calculation, because if you add the 5 seconds from the witching, the timer for the E.Tevent changed to 29 seconds, which is less than the base. But if you do the 5 seconds for the Deckman, it's 14 seconds, which is way more than the base. And that happens because the buff duration from 30% cuts way more from the base of the E.Tevent, due to it being way longer compared to Deckman's. And the 5 seconds that it got added is the same for both curses, which means the 5 seconds added to Deckman's curses, which is Corrupt Magic Circle, is way more relevant than the 5 seconds added to the E.Tevent curse. That's why if you actually take into consideration the Deckman for single target, it's way closer and like compared to the E.Tevent. So you can see here, it's the same thing until you conclude act with the single target from Witching Hour, which will make the thing go from 105% better from the E.Tevent and 1022 base flat damage from the Deckman. So if you do the calculations to make E.Tevent do more damage than the Deckman here, you would need to have a whopping 973 base average base damage, which is insane. And it's really cool because you can see that if I apply with my average damage, which is 380 here, right? You will notice that the Deckman actually does more damage than the E.Tevent in this specific scenario that the enemy has 30% debuff, right? And I'm playing single target. And even Awakened E.Tevent with does not beat this situation here. So that's really cool, and it's something that you need to keep in mind. That means Deckman is actually mega effective for single target, is more effective than the E.Tevent. But it's interesting, and now it's something that's one of the reasons why this took so long. Is Awakened E.Tevent is not that simple to calculate, because Awakened E.Tevent is removing flat defense from the target, so it's increasing not just your E.Tevent damage, it's increasing your Touch of Despair damage, your Decaying Touch damage, and now your other extra damage. Anything that does damage is basically getting increased. So that's why I decided to try to at least redo the calculations for the Curse Explosion. You gotta keep in mind that the damage that you get from the E.Tevent, the 5%, is also for all the other base damage that you're gonna be doing, be it base attacks, be it the base for Curse Explosion, Ray of Disaster base damage, any dagger damage that you do, anything that you do is gonna be increased by E.Tevent, so you gotta think of that behind the scenes. But I wanted to calculate the Curse Explosion. So what I did here is catch the Touch of Despair and the Decaying Touch, and I applied the same situations I did while calculating the Corrupt Magic Circle from Deckman and the E.Tevent curse. So you can see I did the same thing here. I just grabbed whatever status it was there, and I used the multiplication to have a final result of how much each dot plus stacks would do. I left here a note saying 3 to 4 stacks from Touch of Despair, because you can stack actually kind of 4 times Touch of Despair. The only thing it does is it keeps 3 stacks and adds 2 seconds on the duration of the current Touch of Despair, right? On the max duration. So it could go from 16 seconds to 18 seconds. That's about it. Okay, I didn't calculate, take into consideration that, because usually you're not gonna have time to properly stack 4 times the Touch of Despair on the enemy, but it's something that you can keep in mind that can be increased. But regardless, as you can see here, I use this again, my average damage, and you can see the damage that you can do with Touch of Despair and Decaying Touch here. This is the AoE version, this is the single version. And what I did was basically grab everything. So I grabbed Touch of Despair, all for calculations, and the total dot, Decaying Touch, all for calculations, E.Tevent, all for calculations, and Deckman, all for calculations. And what I did here was put it all together to have a total result on how much damage I'm doing. For example, with the Deckman, if I'm using it for PvE full buffs, this is the total damage that I would be doing. If I'm using on players for PvP that have usually the buff duration, this is the damage that I'll be doing. If I'm using versus PvP players with single target, this is the damage that I'll be doing. Then I did the same thing for the E.Tevent, calculating overall your Curse Explosion combo damage. And what I did is then on top of the E.Tevent damage, now that we have at least the total from the dots, right? That's not considering other things, it's only dot damage here. I applied 5% on top of everything here to receive the final result for the Awakened E.Tevent, at least on the Curse Explosion. So here I tried to compare the Deckman versus the E.Tevent. I put one total versus the other total and did the same thing, so extracting one from another and then putting them on the average base calculation. So here it's similar to what you expected on the early results. You're gonna need 275 base damage, average base damage to do more damage with the E.Tevent, and 973 to do more damage with the E.Tevent on the single target. But when you put the Deckman versus the Awakened E.Tevent, now that we're calculating all the dots together with the E.Tevent effect, you will see that the results change a lot, and it's very interesting. You're gonna see that the base damage diff is much smaller as expected, and for you to do more damage with single target, you only need 277 average base damage, which is pretty interesting. I decided to make a simulator here. This simulator is functional, by the way. In case you want to try to test your average damage, you can just come here on this number right next to the thing that I put, and let's say you have an average damage of 450. You can just input it and it's gonna update, so you can check what would theoretically be your damage on this situation. I set on 380 because, like I said, that's my base damage right now, without buffs and other things. So I decided to check, let's say for PvE, the situation, if you have over 200 base damage, then Awakened E.Tevent always gonna be the best damage. But it's interesting to compare Deckman and the E.Tevent, because you can see that it's around 300-ish, like same as the calculations, that E.Tevent gets better than Deckman on the PvE damage. If we go to the AoE PvP, which is the debuff 30%, you can see that Deckman has the highest damage on low average base, which no one's gonna have. But the more you increase, the more E.Tevent becomes like better. You can see just from 200 base damage, average base damage, E.Tevent's already better. Awakened E.Tevent's already better than Deckman. But if you take into calculation only E.Tevent, you're gonna see they're gonna need at least 300-ish as well average damage to be doing more damage with the E.Tevent than the Deckman. And finally, the most interesting one to me is the single target, where you can see that Deckman actually has a lot of like lag in front of E.Tevent and Awakened E.Tevent for the start. But around 300 average base damage, Awakened E.Tevent just takes the lead. So it ends up being the Awakened Tavern is just much better than Deckman in basically all situations right now. If you take in consideration only the one by itself, right? Only the curses from the one. That's another detail that I'm gonna be talking soon. But if you compare Deckman with the Tavern, just the Tavern, not the Awaken, it's interesting to see that you would need to have around what I think it was, like I said, 900, right? 900 average base damage to actually have more damage with the Tevin. Meaning Deckman actually does way more damage on single targets than the normal Tevin, which is a really cool thing to learn. Of course, this will depend a lot on the debuff duration of the enemy, so keep aware of that. That's just a small detail, but it's good information to have regardless. Now let's go to the. If you are an SNS, if you're a Templar, a Palacurs, whatever, then this is probably everything that you need to know about this in the video. But I'm a Dark Blighter. I'm a Dark Blighter, right? And Dark Blighters have the benefit on the deckman of having poison and using poison. So I wanted to take poison into calculation, right? So what I did here was set up a base for the poison. I did the same calculations, base, buffed, and debuffed, right? Same thing for the everything else. And I set two type of stacks. One with 5 stacks of poison and one with 20 stacks of poison. The reason why I did this is because with 5 stacks of poison, is usually the average you get when playing with the Tevin and spreading AoE, and usually some a little bit more than that when you're playing single target. But with the Deckman, you almost always gonna have most of the targets around 15 to 20 stacks, and even more if you're playing single target because of the auto attacks in the middle and other animations and casts of the double touch. So basically, you're gonna almost always have 20 stacks of poison. So I decided to take that into consideration. So I put the Tevin plus 5 stacks of poison versus the Deckman and 20 stacks of poison. And it's really interesting to see the results here, because this is trying to simulate at best like the real scenario in a PvP fight, in a GVG, in a ZVZ. Because in a GVG and ZVZ, you're not gonna have time to fully stack poisons with Tevin. But with the Deckman, a lot of times you're gonna be able to do that. Recently, it has been changed back to 0.5 seconds per tick on the Ray of Disaster, which can affect this, but you can still get decently like 15 to 20 poison stacks. I probably would need to recalculate a little bit on here because I was expecting the 20 stacks, but it should still like be some data that you can check and compare. I still think the array is gonna be changed a little bit, but regardless, I just wanna put this information, this disclaimer out here before anything, right? This is just so you can be aware of how damage and your weapons work, and maybe calculate things more in depth for yourself later if you so desire. But I did the combinations, I did the calculations, and when I compare, you can see something very interesting here. The base diff with all the buffs, you actually can do more damage with the Tevin if you have over 881 average damage. But if you start comparing for PvE with buffs or debuffs, and for PvP with debuffs and for PvP debuffs and single target, Deckman and Poison just blast Tevin and Poison like through the roof. I of course decided to calculate all of this with Awakened Tevin, because like I said, Awakened Tevin will include the poison in the calculation for the 5% extra damage, because it's overall defense on the target. It's not even related to the curse, it's all damage. And even doing this calculation, I decided to use here on this specific one 20 stacks for the PvE only, because most of the times for PvE you're going to be able to stack 20 stacks of poison. Just on PvP that you're not going to have the luxuosity to do that. So even doing these calculations using Awakened Tevin, you can see that you do not beat the damage from the Deckman plus poison, which is crazy. You come very close to it, very close, but you don't beat it. And I decided to make a poison simulator for this. And that's why a lot of people, in me, myself included, always felt like Deckman was doing more damage than Tevin. The thing is, there wasn't the curses from the Deckman that were doing more damage than the E.Tevent. It was a combination of the Deckman stacking poison over the E.Tevent stacking poison that was becoming the huge difference factor on why Deckman was doing more damage than the E.Tevent most of the times. So you can see here on this table, if we take the PvE route, where I just put 20 stacks on everyone, of course Awakened E.Tevent is going to do the most damage, because it's just the base curse, as we compare here, of the Awakened E.Tevent is going to always do more damage than the Deckman, but so if you just add 20 stacks of poison to every one of them, it's not gonna change anything. But if we compare on a PvP scenario with the debuff duration on the AoE, and E.Tevent only stacking 5 stacks and Deckman stacking 20 stacks, you can see that the Deckman actually wins like non-stop until the target hits something around, oh, this one is wrong, sorry, the green should be here, but until the target hits around 1900 average damage, which is insane. So you can see that Deckman is stacking poison stacks, 20 stacks of poison. I imagine around 15 it also should still be superior, 15 over the Awakened E.Tevent. But it's really cool to see like how much the poison actually affects your overall damage. As you can see in almost every scenario, even though Awakened E.Tevent damage comes close to what Deckman damage does, the Deckman overall still has more damage with the poison than the average of the Awakened E.Tevent. So that's a cool thing. That's why I was hoping for Deckman to get fixed, because I still think it's mega solid. Even though Awakened E.Tevent, by applying debuffs on the defense, is much better for your entire Zerg and entire guild, so keep that in mind. The Deckman is better overall for burst damage when you include the poison real scenarios. Let me be very explicit about that. That's Dark Blight, very specifically for Dark Blight. And when you add the Witch Time, with the Witching Hour, you will notice that the Deckman actually has really decently gap over the E.Tevent. Around 600, you can see you have over 1500 damage here. I mean, it's still very similar-ish, but the Deckman overall is still more consistent than the E.Tevent, even the Awakened E.Tevent, sorry. So I just found this very interesting, and that's the reason why I wanted to make this poison comparison, because I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of people, when they play Deckman and then swap to E.Tevent, a lot of people tell me they feel like Deckman was doing more damage, and it's not just a feeling. The reason why it was doing more damage is not because of the Deckman curse being better by itself, it is not. It's because by the poison that comes as a benefit from the Ray of Disaster from the Deckman adding on top of it, okay? The extra note that I added here, I just wanted to put this very clear because a lot of people might misunderstand how the poison chart works. If you include full stacks of poison, 20 stacks of poison, not only on Deckman but on E.Tevent and Awakened E.Tevent, obviously the result that you're gonna get similar to the same of the other simulator without the poison, where Awakened E.Tevent does way more damage than the Deckman. I hope this video cleared some things for you, because this video was a lot of work to make, a lot of work to record, to prepare, to calculate, to go after, to think of real life scenarios, to test on players, and even like compare status. I don't think everything here is perfect. I think, in fact, there's probably mistakes and things that are not gonna be one-to-one, but that's just how it comes when it comes to theory crafting. And the game has a lot of variations that is gonna affect that. But I think the raw idea, the raw concept, and the calculations here match what I felt playing the game, at least, and what the feedback I got from other users that play Curse that I spoke to. And I hope this can open your eyes to like what's the best situation, what's the best weapon, or like what's the best scenario, and how you can adapt based on the info that you have now. If this video was somehow helpful for you, or helped like you have a better vision of the class or what to do with the class or the weapons, I will ask this time for subscribing, liking, and sharing, because this one took a lot of work. But that's about it. Just a reminder, there is the Discord for the Dark Bloods on the description. Not the Dark Bloods, the curses overall in the description. And feel free to join that if you wanna, hang around with other people that discuss about curse classes. That's about it. Thank you for watching. See ya.